Hey guys, enjoy the viewing. The night pressed against me like a cold, damp cloth. I shouldn't have left home, but restlessness gnawed at my bones. Casey's place was just 2 blocks away, close enough to chase away the suffocating silence of my empty house. Our neighborhood hung, suspended in that late summer stillness. Streetlights cast sickly yellow pools across cracked sidewalks, shadows stretching like desperate fingers. Each step felt weighted, unnatural. The first warning came as a rustle from overgrown hedges. Probably nothing, a raccoon, maybe a stray cat. But something felt off. My skin prickled with an electric warning, that primal sense that something watched. Waited. I picked up my pace, phone clutched tight. The rhythm of my footsteps echoed between silent houses. Another sound, a twig snapping behind me. I froze. Turned. Nothing. Just empty street and deepening darkness. Casey answered on the first ring. Her voice was a lifeline, steady and calm. "I see you coming," she said. "I'll be waiting on the porch." Her silhouette appeared in the second-floor window, backlit by soft lamplight. She waved. I waved back. But then her voice changed, a tremor beneath the words. "Who's behind you?" Time suspended. Cold sweat erupted across my skin. I turned, muscles locked in pure terror. He was close. Too close. A man crouched just feet away, wild-eyed and lean. Dirty clothes hung from his wiry frame like tattered flags. His gaze burned with something darker than hunger. I screamed. He lunged. An arm snaked around my neck, practiced brutal. But something broke the moment. Casey's voice, sharp and loud from the open window. The man hesitated. That heartbeat of uncertainty was everything. I twisted free, legs pumping, terror giving me wings. I reached Casey's door. Her mom yanked it open. Safety. Sanctuary. The man vanished like smoke, leaving nothing but a lingering sense of violated space. Police came, took statements, searched, found nothing. Weeks later, they caught him. Another town, another potential victim. Her story could have ended differently. I never walk alone anymore. 2 blocks might as well be 2 continents now. Some distances can't be measured in steps, but in the space between safety and nightmare. The world looks different when you know monsters aren't just fairy tales. They walk among streetlights. They hide in shadows. And sometimes they're closer than you think. The storm raged outside, a relentless symphony of rain and thunder. Darkness pressed against the windows, transforming my living room into an isolated bubble of artificial light. I'd been trying to distract myself, but the television's flickering images only amplified the night's oppressive atmosphere. The first knock was easy to dismiss. A random tap against the window, nothing more. But the second knock changed everything, sharp, deliberate, unmistakably human. I muted the TV. Silence rushed in, broken only by the storm's continuous assault. Another knock, louder, more insistent. Approaching the window felt like walking into a trap. Lightning briefly illuminated the porch, revealing a woman standing perfectly still. She was drenched, water streaming down her face and clothes. But it wasn't her soaked appearance that stopped my breath. It was her eyes, vacant, calculating. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice flat and emotionless. "I need help." Something was wrong, profoundly wrong. "What's happening?" I asked, keeping the window closed. She tilted her head, that mechanical smile spreading across her face. "Are you alone?" The question hung between us like a threat. My skin crawled. Every cell screamed to run, to hide. to do anything but stand frozen before this strange woman. She knocked again, harder. The sound reverberated through the house like a warning. "Please," she said, but it didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a command. I backed away, each step careful and measured. My phone was in the kitchen, a lifetime away. Each movement felt like potential exposure, like I was giving away my position in some unspoken game. The knocking stopped. Silence crashed down, punctuated only by rainfall and my ragged breathing. But the silence was a lie. I heard something else, footsteps, deliberate, circling, testing each window like someone mapping an escape route. When I finally reached the phone, my hands shook so badly I could barely dial. "Someone's outside," I whispered to the 911 operator. 15 minutes later, police cars arrived. Lights flashed against rain-slicked windows. They searched everywhere, found nothing. No tracks, no evidence. Just empty darkness and continuing storm. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Morning revealed the true horror. The back door stood unlocked, wide open, waiting. She had been inside all along. The storm devoured the night, rain hammering like desperate fists against the roof. Lightning carved jagged patterns across window panes, transforming my living room into a canvas of shifting shadows. The first knock barely registered, just another random sound lost in the tempest's chaos. But the second knock, sharp and deliberate, carved ice through my veins. I muted the television. Silence crashed in, punctuated only by rainfall's relentless rhythm. When I approached the window, she was already there. A woman drenched beyond recognition, water streaming down her face like tears. Her eyes held something worse than desperation, a calculated emptiness that suggested she was reading from a script only she could hear. "Can I come in?" she asked. No tremor, no fear, just a flat demand disguised as a request. Something fundamental warned me. This wasn't a plea for help. This was something else entirely. "What do you want?" I responded, fingers gripping the curtain. She tilted her head, mechanical, predatory. That smile never reached her eyes. "Are you alone?" The question landed like a knife's edge. My breath caught. Panic bloomed in my chest. Her fingers pressed against the glass. "No urgency. No desesperación. Just steady, calculating pressure." I backed away. Each step felt like walking through quicksand. My phone sat across the room, an impossible distance. Lightning flickered, casting her silhouette in sharp relief. The knocking stopped. Silence descended, but not peaceful silence. Hunting silence. Footsteps circled outside, splashing, testing, searching. When I finally called 911, my voice broke. "Someone's outside," I whispered, crouched behind the kitchen counter. 15 minutes later, police cars arrived. Lights sliced through rain-drenched darkness. They searched, found nothing. Absolutely nothing. Morning revealed the true horror. The back door stood wide open, unlocked, waiting. She had been inside all along. Moonlight painted the hills silver, transforming wilderness into a landscape of shadows and silence. Logan and I weren't experienced campers, but we craved this. Total isolation, far from civilization's constant noise. We pitched our tent at the hill's peak, overlooking dense forest. Trees swayed in a whisper-soft breeze. The night felt impossibly still. The first branch crack seemed innocent. Forest sounds, probably a deer. But the next snap carried different weight, deliberate, calculated. "Did you hear that?" I asked Logan. He froze, listened. Footsteps approached. Not animal. Something more precise. Something watching. Probably a hiker, Logan muttered, but panic edged his voice. Hours passed. Campfire dying. Embers casting weak, trembling light. Then the sounds returned. Circling. Methodical. Something moving around our tent with unnatural patience. We didn't move. Didn't breathe. A soft brushing against tent fabric. Something feeling its way around us. Exploring. Measuring. My phone sat just beyond reach. One movement would betray our position. Logan's eyes darted toward the tent's zipper. His breath came shallow, controlled. Suddenly, the sounds shifted. Retreated. But not gone. Waiting. Watching from darkness's edge. "We need to leave," Logan mouthed. We crawled out, grabbing only essentials. Shadows stretched impossibly long. And then, something stood at the clearing's border. Not human. Not anything recognizable. Tall. Thin. Moving with jerky, impossible precision. Its head tilted, curious, calculating. We ran. Branches whipped our faces. Roots threatened to trip us. Behind us, footsteps thundered. Relentless. Hunting. We didn't stop until we reached the car. Some experiences defy explanation. Some nights leave scars deeper than any physical wound. We never returned to those hills. We never spoke of that night again. Some silences are better left unbroken. Camping always felt like an escape. This time, it was supposed to be me and my older brother, Charlie, a quick weekend trip to disconnect from the city noise. We picked a remote spot, tucked deep within the state forest. It was just us, our tent, and the endless expanse of trees. The first night was perfect. We built a roaring fire, swapped old stories, and let the forest silence settle around us. By midnight, the fire dwindled to glowing embers, and the stars were sharp pinpricks against the black sky. Sleep came easily in the cool, crisp air. The next morning, Charlie wanted to hike deeper into the woods. I was reluctant. I liked the safety of the clearing, but he teased me, calling me a homebody, so I caved. We set off mid-morning, following trails that grew less defined the further we walked. By the time the sun hung high in the sky, the forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of identical trees and underbrush. Around midday, Charlie decided he wanted to go off-trail, swearing he'd seen something through the trees, a small cabin maybe. He was ahead of me, his steps crunching confidently on the forest floor. But as I followed, something gnawed at the edge of my thoughts. It wasn't just the thickness of the woods or the faint echo of wind that made me uneasy. It was something I couldn't put into words, a sense that we weren't alone. "Let's turn back." I called to Charlie, but he waved me off, already disappearing into the trees. I picked up my pace to keep up, frustration growing with each step. When I reached the spot where he'd been, he wasn't there. "Charlie!" I shouted. My voice rang out, swallowed quickly by the forest's dense silence. No answer. Panic set in as I yelled again, scanning the trees, trying to catch a flash of his jacket or the sound of movement. Nothing. The air felt different now, colder. The forest, which had been alive with birds and distant rustling, seemed to hold its breath. I followed the direction I thought he'd gone, moving faster, my breathing growing heavier. The forest seemed to shift, the trees taller, darker, almost leaning in. And then ahead of me, I saw movement, a figure stepping between the trunks. "Charlie," I called, relief breaking through my panic. But as I moved closer, I realized it wasn't him. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The figure was tall, its clothes indistinct, almost blending with the shadows. It stood perfectly still, facing away from me, head tilted as though listening to something I couldn't hear. My heart pounded as I froze, unsure of what to do. Then slowly the figure began to turn. Its face, if it had one, was obscured by the dim light filtering through the trees. But its presence was all wrong. Something primal in me screamed to run, and for once I didn't hesitate. I bolted back the way I came, my legs burning as I tore through the underbrush. The forest seemed endless now, the trees stretching impossibly high. I didn't stop until I burst into the clearing where our tent stood. My chest heaved, my hands shaking as I scanned the camp. Charlie wasn't there. I stayed awake that night, clutching a flashlight and a knife, jumping at every sound the forest made. By morning, I still hadn't seen him. When the search team finally arrived, they scoured the forest for days. They found no trace of him. No tracks, no belongings, no signs he'd ever been there at all. The forest doesn't give back what it takes. When I bought the house, the shed in the backyard was an afterthought. It was old, weathered, and tucked into the farthest corner of the lot, hidden behind an overgrown garden. The realtor had waved it off, calling it rustic charm. To me, it was just storage for tools and lawn equipment. I never thought much about it, until I heard the noise. It was late, past midnight, and the summer heat lingered even as the crickets sang outside. I was in the kitchen, sipping water before heading to bed, when a muffled thud echoed from the backyard. My first thought was a raccoon or maybe a stray cat. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you worried about anything serious. Still, curiosity nudged me toward the back door. I stepped out on the porch, barefoot, and the boards creaked beneath me. The yard was bathed in silver moonlight, casting sharp shadows that made everything feel sharper, more alive. The shed stood at the edge of the light, dark and looming. I almost went back inside, but then I saw it, the faintest flicker of movement near the shed's door. "Hello," I called out, instantly regretting it. My voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the thick air. I stepped down into the yard, squinting to see better. The garden's tangled leaves brushed against my legs as I moved closer. The shed door was slightly ajar, swinging ever so gently as though nudged by the breeze. But there was no breeze that night. My pulse quickened. I tightened my grip on the flashlight I'd grabbed, its beam shaky in my trembling hand. "Is someone there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Silence. I crept forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The grass seemed to hush under my feet, the world growing unnaturally still. The door creaked wider as I approached, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I stopped just short of the threshold, my flashlight cutting into the shadows. The inside of the shed was cluttered with the usual: rusty tools, an old lawnmower, a broken rake. Everything exactly as I'd left it. And then I noticed the smell, damp and metallic, like wet earth mixed with rust. That's when I saw it. In the far corner, almost hidden behind a stack of paint cans, was a man. He was crouched low, his head bent at an unnatural angle, his back turned to me. His clothes were filthy, torn in places, and his hair was matted to his head. My breath hitched as I realized he wasn't moving, just sitting there frozen like a mannequin. "Hey!" My voice cracked. "You need to leave now." He didn't respond, didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to breathe. The air felt heavier, pressing down on my chest. I took a cautious step backward, my flashlight still fixed on him. As I moved, his head began to turn. Not the rest of him, just his head twisting slowly, impossibly toward me. I ran. I didn't stop until I was inside. The door slammed and bolted behind me. My hands fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 as my body shook. I barely got the words out, Something about an intruder, a man in the shed. The dispatcher promised someone would be there soon. When the police arrived, I followed them into the backyard, clutching my arms tightly to keep from trembling. They opened the shed, their flashlights cutting through the dark. But it was empty. No man, no sign anyone had been there. Just the same tools, the same clutter. Everything exactly as I'd seen it, except for the door, which now hung completely off its hinges. I sold the house 2 weeks later. It was supposed to be a casual dinner with friends. My house, my cooking, just a chance to unwind with people I trusted. Sarah, Tom, Lisa, and Jake arrived one by one, and the evening started like any other. Laughter filled the room as the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread wafted through the air. The candles flickered, and the wine flowed. The oddness began subtly, almost imperceptibly. It started when Tom, the quietest of the group, began tapping his glass rhythmically. A light tap, 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 his eyes fixed on the tablecloth. At first, I thought he was just zoning out. But when I called his name, he blinked rapidly, as if waking from a dream, and gave a tight smile. "Sorry," he muttered, his voice strained. "I'll let it go. People have their quirks." As the night wore on, the conversations became more disjointed. Lisa and Jake were arguing over something trivial, a scene from a movie, while Sarah laughed too loudly at nothing. Tom, meanwhile, had grown more distant, his tapping now replaced by a slow, scratching motion along the edge of the table with his fingernail. "Tom, are you okay?" I finally asked, my voice breaking through the escalating tension. He looked up startled. His expression was hard to read, blank, almost slack, like his face had forgotten how to emote. "I'm fine," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Sarah giggled nervously. "He's just tired," she said, her eyes darting toward the others as if looking for backup. No one responded. The air in the room grew heavier, like we were all breathing through damp cloth. The warmth from the candles felt oppressive now, stifling, as if the walls were inching closer. By the time dessert came, I was ready to call it a night. I cleared the plates, and that's when I noticed the oddest thing. Tom's plate was spotless, completely clean. He hadn't touched his food at all, yet he'd sat there the entire time, pretending to eat. "Tom," I said carefully, "are you sure you're okay? You didn't eat anything." He didn't answer. His head tilted slightly to one side, his eyes fixed on something just past my shoulder. A chill shot down my spine as I realized his focus wasn't on me, but on the mirror behind me. "Tom," I said again, louder this time. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. The sound made everyone jump. For a moment, no one spoke, and then Tom muttered, "I need to leave." Without another word, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door, his steps unusually heavy. The room fell silent after he left, the clinking of silverware and soft hum of conversation gone. Lisa broke the tension with a nervous laugh. "Well, that was weird," she said, trying to lighten the mood. But no one laughed with her. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of unease. One by one, my friends made their excuses and left. I was relieved when the door finally shut behind the last of them. I leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply, trying to shake the strange tension that had hung over the night. But as I turned to clear the table, I froze. Tom's seat was empty, but his wine glass was full again. His chair, though pushed back, was wet, as if something damp had been sitting there. And on the table, scratched faintly into the wood, were 3 words I hadn't noticed before. "He's not done." The room suddenly felt darker. I didn't sleep that night. I've always liked taking the long way home. The winding back roads, the dense woods flanking each side. It gave me time to think. That night, I left work late, my shift dragging longer than usual, and the autumn fog hung thick in the air. I turned onto Willow Creek Road, the kind of place where you rarely see another car. It was supposed to be quiet, peaceful. About 10 minutes in, I saw a flicker of light cutting through the trees on the right side of the road. A cabin, its windows glowing faintly. I'd driven this route dozens of times and never noticed a house there before. But it wasn't the light that unsettled me. It was the door, hanging open like a mouth caught mid-sentence, swaying slightly in the breeze. I should have kept driving. I know that now. But curiosity is a strange thing, and something about the scene pulled me in. Maybe it was the thought that someone needed help. Maybe it was just the kind of foolishness that comes with a long night and a restless mind. I pulled over and killed the engine, the hum of the car fading into the surrounding quiet. Stepping out, I could feel the chill of the night seeping through my jacket. The fog was heavier here, clinging low to the ground, curling around my ankles as I approached the cabin. The closer I got, the more wrong it felt. The windows were cracked, their glass jagged and smeared with dirt. A single bulb hung from the ceiling inside, swinging lazily, casting shadows that danced unnaturally along the walls. And the door, wide open, as if it had been waiting. "Hello," I called, my voice barely louder than a whisper. No answer. I hesitated at the threshold, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But I stepped inside anyway. The floorboards creaked under my weight, the sound echoing in the empty space. The cabin was sparse, just a table, a few chairs, and a fireplace filled with ash. There were no signs of anyone living there, yet the air felt thick, as if the place had absorbed something it shouldn't have. That's when I noticed the markings. They covered the walls, faint and uneven, scratched into the wood. Spirals, symbols, and shapes I couldn't recognize. My chest tightened as I traced one with my finger. It was cold to the touch, colder than the air around me. Behind me, the door slammed shut. I spun around, my heart pounding. The room was darker now, the single bulb swinging more violently, its light casting frantic, spinning shadows. The fog seeped through the cracks in the walls, curling toward me like fingers. I ran for the door, yanking it open with trembling hands. The air outside was somehow colder, the fog thicker, heavier. My car sat just a few yards away, but the distance felt endless. I sprinted toward it, fumbling for my keys as I reached the door. But as I slid into the driver's seat and slammed it shut, I realized something was wrong. The fog had seeped into the car, swirling unnaturally in the passenger seat. And then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the back seat. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Instead, I started the engine, the headlights cutting through the fog as I sped down the road. The sound grew louder, closer, as if it was inside my own head. I didn't stop until I reached home. But even now, days later, I hear that scratching sometimes, faint and distant. I haven't taken Willow Creek Road since. I don't think I ever will. My shift at the diner ended later than usual that night. By the time I locked up and walked to my car, the streets were deserted, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. The drive home was uneventful, just me, the hum of the engine, and the faint glow of streetlights. But as I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something odd. A figure stood across the street, half hidden by the shadows of the oak trees. They weren't moving, just standing there facing my house. My headlights briefly illuminated them. A man dressed in dark, ill-fitting clothes with a slouched posture. He didn't react to the light, didn't step forward or back, just stared. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but told myself it was nothing. Maybe he was waiting for someone or just passing through. It wasn't unusual in a neighborhood like mine where people kept to themselves. I grabbed my bag and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Normally, I'd turn on the TV or play some music, but tonight I just stood by the door listening. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, and a faint creak came from the porch. I tried to shake the unease, blaming it on exhaustion. I hadn't slept much in days, and my nerves were raw. I peeked out the window, hoping to confirm the man was gone. But he wasn't. He was closer now, standing at the edge of my driveway, his head tilted slightly, as if studying the house. I stepped back from the window, my heartbeat quickening. Grabbing my phone, I debated calling the police, but what would I say? A man standing outside isn't a crime. Still, I couldn't just ignore him. "Hey," I shouted, cracking open the door, but staying behind it. "Can I help you?" No response. He didn't move, didn't even flinch. Just stared, slamming the door shut. I bolted the lock and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the couch. My breath came in shallow gasps as I paced the living room, unsure of what to do. Minutes passed, then an hour. When I finally dared to look again, the man was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As I turned away from the window, I heard it a knock. Soft at first, almost hesitant, then louder. It was coming from the back door. Every muscle in my body tensed. He had moved around the house. I crept toward the kitchen, the bat gripped tightly in my hand. The knock came again, slow and deliberate. The back door had no window, just a flimsy lock I suddenly realized might not hold if he tried to force it. "Leave!" I shouted, hoping my voice would carry enough authority to scare him off. "I'm calling the cops." The knocking stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard a scraping sound like metal against wood. It wasn't at the door anymore. It was at the window. I didn't think. I ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me and grabbing my phone. The operator's voice was calm, steady, as I explained the situation, but my hands were trembling too much to hold the phone steady. When the police arrived, the man was gone. They searched the yard, the street, even the woods behind the house, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs anyone had been there, except for the scratch marks on the back door. Deep, deliberate gouges. That was 3 nights ago. And now, every time I come home, I check the driveway. I check the windows, because I know he wasn't just passing through. It was one of those nights where the house felt too quiet. My parents were out for the evening, and the old place creaked and groaned as it always did when I was alone. The flicker of the TV in the living room was the only light, and I had curled up on the couch, half watching a show I'd already seen before. That's when I heard it, my mom's voice calling my name. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. It was faint, muffled, almost like she was calling from another room. I muted the TV and listened, my heart beating faster than it should have been. "Anna!" It came again, this time from downstairs. I frowned, confused. My parents hadn't mentioned coming home early, and I hadn't heard the front door open. The basement door was closed as always. The idea of my mom being down there didn't make sense. "Mom!" I called back, standing slowly. No response. I hesitated by the door to the basement, my hand resting on the cold brass knob. The old wood was warped, and it stuck slightly as I pulled it open. The smell of damp earth hit me first, the faint scent of mildew that always lingered in the basement. "Mom!" I called again, louder this time, my voice echoing down the narrow staircase. Still nothing. I grabbed my phone and flicked on its flashlight, stepping carefully down the stairs. The beam of light swept over the cluttered space. Cardboard boxes, old furniture, and shelves stacked with things my family hadn't touched in years. The basement was still and silent, except for the faint hum of the water heater. "Mom!" My voice wavered now, uncertainty creeping in. I moved further into the room, shining the light into the far corners. Nothing, just shadows and dust. And yet, the feeling of being watched prickled at the back of my neck. I turned to head back upstairs, trying to shake the growing unease, when I heard it again. Anna. This time, it wasn't coming from the basement. It was upstairs. My blood ran cold. The voice was unmistakable. It sounded just like my mom. But the tone was wrong, flat, and deliberate, as though someone was trying too hard to mimic her. I froze, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. If my parents weren't home, who or what was upstairs? My phone slipped in my sweaty grip, and I barely caught it before it hit the floor. The light trembled as I slowly backed toward the stairs, keeping my eyes fixed on the basement, as though something might emerge from the shadows. The voice called my name again, softer now, almost coaxing. It sent a chill through me, and I clutched the banister, forcing my legs to move. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated, peering around the doorframe. The living room was just as I'd left it, the glow of the paused TV casting faint shadows across the walls. Everything looked normal, except the front door. It was wide open. The cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the faint sound of leaves rustling. The darkness outside seemed impenetrable, and for a moment, I stood there, frozen between going out and staying in. Then a noise from the kitchen, a single deliberate footstep. I bolted out the door, my phone clutched tightly in my hand, and ran to the neighbor's house without looking back. I didn't stop until I was inside, the lock clicking securely behind me. The police found no one in the house, no signs of forced entry. But when they asked me why I'd gone into the basement, I couldn't bring myself to explain, because they wouldn't have believed me. Don't forget to subscribe. You are the best. Goodbye.